2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you in this room and also in the YouTube. It's with great pleasure and honor that in behalf of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, we welcome everyone to the wrap-up session of the New Heritage Approaches Globinar as part of the 2021 debate promoted by the international initiative, Our World Heritage. This is a collaborative work which brought together universities, public and private institutions, nonprofit organizations, and individuals interested in debating the relevant themes associated with the World Heritage Convention to be held in 2022 by UNESCO. In this context, I would like to introduce and thank the main team that was involved with all the personal effort and institutional collaboration that made possible this webinar, as you can see in this wrap-up session. First of all, thanks to Mike Godcook. She's from Switzerland, and she takes care of us in a daily basis. José Landi, our technical and staff, the permanent technical support, and Monica Bahia Schli, Daniele Pini, Jonathan Scharfman, and Humberto Bonomo, because they have been working since last year to be possible to have all this 1 year debate, 2021 debate, as you can see in during this year. We are going to have 4 parts of this wrap-up session. In the first part, we're going to have our presenters, Lia Mota and Nivaldo Vieira de Andrade Jr. from Brazil. Monica will introduce them in a minute. Then they're going to talk about the daily what's happening today in Brazil, the main challenges they have today regarding heritage conservation. Then you're going to have a second part, highlights and outcomes with brief reports of some of the sessions provided by the coordinators and rapporteur of the sessions. Then in the third part, a talk with Mike Turner, Francesco Bandarin, and Mike, like a final message and highlights. And in the fourth part, we're going to have all the acknowledgements and final thanks to all the team that could be made possible this webinar. And we have to thank all time, because without all these personal efforts, we wouldn't even could produce, organize, and have all these so relevant and so important sessions. Well, I'll pass the floor on the screen to Monica, and then she can introduce our speakers for the day.
Thank you very much, Vera. It is a pleasure and an honor to me to welcome you all and to listen, to welcome you all to the final session of the New Heritage Approach Globinar, and that gather together so many voices and made possible a learning process from many different experiences. As we mentioned before, the year of 2021 is dedicated to the 12 thematic forums, within the framework of the Our World Heritage Movement, promoted by different groups composed by by people from various parts of the world. The entire month of June was dedicated to debate new heritage approaches from various perspectives in 24 sessions, 4 project exhibitions, and gathering 21 coordinators and 75 speakers. July will be dedicated to the debate of the theme sustainability in a series of the other activities. And today, it's a honor and a pleasure to welcome Lia Mota and Nivaldo Vieira de Andrade Jr., which are going to bring for us an overview of the main challenges in Brazil today regarding the heritage conservation. Both speakers will have 15 minutes to their contributions, and I will introduce first Lia and then Nivaldo. Lia is a specialist in conservation and restoration of historical sites and monuments and holds a PhD in urbanism by the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. She is a public servant of the Brazilian Federal Institute of Heritage, IFAM, and currently part of the team of the professional training coordination of the Lúcio Costa Center and a permanent faculty of the professional master degree at IFAM. Nivaldo Vieira de Andrade Jr. is the president of the Forum of Entities in Defense of Brazilian Heritage. He is also ex-president of the Brazilian Institute of Architects from 2017 to 2020, and professor of architecture and heritage conservation at the Federal University of Bahia in Brazil. So I pass the floor to Lia with a great pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure being here. I thank you a lot for the invitation, and I want to congratulate all of you for the organization and for the choice of the subjects of the different sections. I wasn't present in a lot of sections, but I saw almost all the presentations in the YouTube. And I think that's a great contribution, and I learned a lot. And when Monica asked me for a title of my presentation, I'm putting the hour on, not to pass my 15 minutes. Well, when Monica asked me for a title for my presentation, I thought that seeing the videos, what I felt was this idea of ninguém solta a mão de ninguém. That was a button when the government was elected. In English, it would be no one lets go anyone's hand in our World Heritage Movement. That's what I felt. I felt that there were hands that I could hold in this difficult moment of Brazil. This expression has a lot of explanations, but one is that in the dictatorialship of the 60s, the students in São Paulo, when the police invaded the universities, they yelled that no one lets go anyone's hand. So we are in this moment really in a very difficult situation. It's not a secret, it's public, worldwide public, of a government that doesn't respect the cultural heritage, the diversity, and doesn't respect the natural heritage, and even has something else that we have to remember, that doesn't respect the idea of property as having a social function. And heritage only exists because property has a social function. And that's in the Constitution of Brazil and since 1934. So it's a very, very, very difficult situation we live. And I thought this title would be the best title for me to speak of the main challenges of Brazil in this moment. Pode passar, Mônica. Well, I'd like to just to remember that when I say that we have to be together, it's because this field of heritage preservation is a field where we have to have resistance and have to have resilience. And I thought I should give how did we get to where we got and what we could lose with this new government and these new ideas. Was in Brazil, I started in the 30s with cultural heritage, but we had to have resistance since the 60s. And UNESCO was very important for us to relook at heritage and to open new possibilities. The experts of UNESCO came to Brazil, and it was a very important moment. Then you have in the 70s and 80s, in the period of redemocratization, you have social claims for government protection of Afro-Brazilian groups, Indian groups, and groups in towns that were organized against the real estate speculations that would tear down their places of living. And then you have intangible heritage gains place in the neoliberal government in the 90s that didn't want to know of tangible heritage because it was too much trouble for the government. So it opened space for the intangible heritage. Our colleagues had the force to give this moment of resistance and resilience to the national institution that brings together local and state institutions. We have a network of institutions in Brazil. And in the 200s, we have the political incentive of diversity and inclusion of different social groups, principally by the minister Gilberto Gil, that's a singer, important singer. And now I think that we do have movements like Our World Heritage as an important reinforcement for our resistance and resilience. Pode passar. I'd like to say that the main advance and that we could suffer a lot if we lose is the understanding of heritage as a resource for dignifying social groups that were excluded of heritage practices until the 60s, let's say. Also understanding urban sites for their historical value and as memory and identity reference, regardless of the architectural and stylistic characteristics. And that's very important. That is a big change. Laguna is the most important example of this. It's a town that you could see by the architecture that it's not uniform in a style. It's not colonial. That was the most important thing valued in Brazil. And it gave the opportunity to elaborate a new concept of heritage, considering the claim of people. You could pass, Monica. This is Terreiro of Casa Branca, of a place of the religion of African Brazilians. And that it was a very important, and I'm saying that because listening to the videos of the sections, I saw a lot of questions about tangible and intangible heritage. And this was in the 80s, and I think it's the very, very important way of valuing a place as because of its intangible value. It was a very big argument because those tiny houses you could see in the image, they weren't enough for the architects of IFAN to have this protected. So it was protected as a place of the culture of African Brazilians. You could pass. But the most important thing that we have was the Constitution of, Federal Constitution of 1988 that understood or adopted the concept of heritage as material and intangible goods, taking as a reference of memory, identity, and action of the different groups that are part of the formation of Brazilian society. That changes. Heritage, material or immaterial, is not more by the characteristics of the things, but yes, by them being reference of identity and memory and action. You could pass. These are some images. I took that of the site of IFAN, of intangible or immaterial heritage. They also are cultural, immaterial heritage of UNESCO, declared by UNESCO. That was a great advance, but we don't have the same thing when you think in the material, the sites, the material goods. Could pass, Monica. You have some very important examples, like you had in the 80s, the Terreiro da Casa Branca in Salvador, of religious, African religion manifestations. You have, this was, it's a cave of religious practices of this group of Indian people. And it was protected by, not by the registration, but by the what we call tombamento, that's the classification, because it's out of the park that is protected by the Indian institution. And the group of Indians asked for the protection because they said that the farmer there could just destroy the thing. So it's very interesting how these people see heritage as a resource for them to protect their things and be included as people that the government would look at. That was in 2006 when it was protected. You could pass. But that isn't the most usual way of protecting. We still have European patterns and history of Brazilian treatment of heritage very strongly in the memory of people. So I made a study that even the people that asked for the government protection of their places, they try to say that it looks like Ouro Preto, or it looks like some kind of European style of the international historiography of architecture. So that's not an easy task. And we have very good speeches, but we still are owing a lot in actions. Pode passar. And that one section I heard two questions. I even noted them down. That how do we do to go to from the speeches to the action? And I think it's with examples. That's what we could do. We that are institutions, universities, we have to give examples. And UNESCO is doing some important things. This is Cais do Valongo. That's a place where slaves would arrive and Africans would arrive to be slaves in Brazil. And it was an important nomination of UNESCO. But normally, UNESCO reinforces that tradition, reinforces Ouro Preto, that image. So I think a movement like this that speaks about world heritage and says it's not speaking in name of UNESCO, as I'm not speaking in name of IFAM, has an important task to play. And I think we have to find a way to have examples, and we have to be together with that. And I think you could pass, Monica. And I think we have to be radical. I don't know if that's a proper word in English, in creating examples. And I think this example of a favela in Rio is something to be talked. I think that's what we should do. I think that's the way. I just want to conclude saying that I saw in one of the tables a student, very interesting table. She was criticizing Rio de Janeiro as a cultural paisagem. And she was saying that the buffer zone is where life happens and where the city happens, and it should be included. I agree, but I had the opportunity to be in some sections that were talking about that with experts of ICOMOS. And what we saw is that UNESCO has his politic relations, bilateral relations, and it doesn't advance because of this. When you exclude the favelas of the Rio Paisagem Cultural, it's not the fault of the technicians that studied that. It's this way of maintaining sort of criteria that are already established. I hope I stayed in my time. I thank you very much for listening to me. And I think that's not our main challenge. Our main challenge is to have good examples, to see if people understand that they also could be included as value, as predictors of values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. And I will pass right away to Nivaldo.
Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time zone. I'd like to thank Vera and Monica and everyone for the invitation. It's an honor to speak in this wrap-up session, along with my good friend Leah Mota. I haven't seen Leah for a long time now. I'm here as the coordinator of the Forum of Entities in the Defense of Brazilian Cultural Heritage, as Monica has already explained. We have created this forum in October of 2019 during the National Congress of Architects in Porto Alegre, because we understood that heritage conservation policies has never been so threatened in Brazil as they are today. We are living something since the beginning of the current government of the President Jair Messias Bolsonaro that has no precedent in the history of Brazil in terms of heritage conservation policies. The National Heritage Institute was created in 37. It has survived to many threats in these years, to two dictatorships in a lot of situations, many changes of name, but never was so. Not only the National Heritage Institute, but all the heritage policies, public policies in Brazil, has never been so threatened. So I'll explain a little bit what is the forum that I preside, what are the threats that we are facing, and why we are so worried about what is happening in Brazil today. The forum now has is composed by 25 national entities. I really need to name them because it's important for you to understand that we cover almost every area of specialists working with heritage policies and heritage conservation. And also because in the last month, a couple of months ago, we started to integrate in the forum not only specialist entities, but also entities that represents the traditional communities related to our intangible heritage. So today, the 25 national entities that are part of the forum are the Brazilian Association of Anthropology, Brazilian Association of Landscape Architects, Brazilian Association of Rock Art, Brazilian Association of Architecture Education, Brazilian Association of Cultural Management, Association of Brazilian Geographers, the National Associations for Research and Graduate Studies in five fields: architecture and urbanism, geography, social sciences, urban and regional planning, and history, the National Association for Research in Heritage Science and Technology, the National Network of Archivists of Federal Institutions of Higher Education, the Brazilian Committee of Art History, the National Federation of Students of Architecture and Urbanism in Brazil, the National Federation of Architects and Urbanists, the National Forum of Archaeology Associations, the Institute of Architects of Brazil, who was the founder of the forum, was the president of the AIB, the Institute of Architects of Brazil at the time, the Brazilian Archaeology Society, the Brazilian Society of Sociology, and also the Brazilian sections or Brazilian committees of four very important councils or committee, international councils or committees that all of you know them, that are ICOMOS, the Brazilian Committee of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOM, the Brazilian Committee of the International Council of Museums, the Brazilian section of DOCOMOMO, the International Working Party for Documentation and Conservation of Building Sites and Neighborhoods of the Modern Movement, and the Brazilian section of TICI, the International Committee for the Conservation of the Industrial Heritage. Very recently, CONAC, that's the National Coordination for Rural Black Quilombos. Quilombos are settlements established by escaped slaves, are communities formed mainly by Afro-Brazilians in rural areas. The National Coordination of Rural Black Quilombos also is part of the forum now. We also have today sections of the forum working 25 of the 27 states of Brazil. We are talking about more than 300 specialists working voluntarily for the protection of Brazilian heritage. Which are the threats that we have identified in these years? Uh, First of all, IFAM, the National Heritage Institute, was always connected to the ministry since its creation in 37 to the Ministry of Education. And in the early 80s or late 70s, I think early 80s, was created the Ministry of Culture. And IFAM, of course, was connected, was put inside the Ministry of Culture. President Jair Bolsonaro decided to extinguish the Ministry of Culture, created the Ministry of Citizenship. IFAN was for a short period put there, but then it was transferred to the Ministry of Tourism. We are very worried about that because, of course, tourism is a very important tool for the conservation of some sites, but we cannot uh, put cultural assets that are important, such as Terreiros de Candomblé, as Leah has said, the Afro-Brazilian temples, under the tourism key. We cannot think about these cultural assets only in terms of tourism, because some cultural assets in Brazil, they cannot be used for tourism. Some of them, of course, can be, but some of them cannot. And the new president, the presidency of IFAN was always occupied by professionals from different areas, historians, architects, anthropologists, even an important designer who was Aloysio Magalhães, who started or restarted the idea of cultural intangible heritage in Brazil in the 70s. But now we have a professional of tourism, a servant of the public Ministry of Tourism that is in charge of IFAN. And this is very worrying because many other actions, strategies that IFAN is working on are putting tourism as the central aspect of conservation policies in Brazil. Besides that, many important spaces in FUN are being occupied not more by specialists, by people who has been working in the conservation of the heritage for decades, but people who has no experience and no formation, no studies in any area of conservation are being installed important roles in FUN. For example, the direction of intangible heritage is occupied for some months now by a bishop of a new Pentecostal church. He has even used his office inside the fund to record live of his church, asking for the contribution of his uh, his followers. So we have even presented the forum by its national entities, has presented a claim in the Ministério Público, the public ministry. I can't explain that. It's a part, the part of the law that is in charge of protecting the general interest, the public interests. So many of the most important states of Brazil, the state directions of IFAN are not anymore in the hands of specialists. For example, Brasilia, that is a World Heritage Site, now is a bachelor in computer science that is in charge of that. While in Goiás, a state that includes a city, Goiás, who is inscribed also in the World Heritage List, the director is a rancher that had never worked before with anything related to heritage or to public policies, etc., etc. I could explain here many situations like that, but those people are people with no experience, no formation, no education in terms of heritage that has been working for deputies from the basis of the current president, and those are exchanges of opportunities. They get these spaces in change for any kind of contribution in voting in the national Congress, etc. So this is one problem. Another problem that we are still analyzing because it's really recent is the licensing process. IFAN has released a couple of weeks ago or last week a new orientation, a new guideline regarding how licensing process is going to be. Archaeologists, for example, are very worried about that because in many situations, licensing will be done by computer without any accompanying of any specialists. We are still analyzing that. I wouldn't like to say anything more about that because we are still in the process of understanding what is changing. Last year, the National Council on Cultural Politics, that is not inside the fund, it's over the fund, it was connected to the Ministry of Culture, was extinguished. It's a very important council because we have a law in Brazil that allows firms, great firms, to instead of paying taxes, they can use this money to sponsor cultural activities such as restorations, such as creation of museums, using public money to do that. But they need to present a project, and this project need to have to be approved by this council. And now this council, where many of our entities were represented, like the Brazilian Institute of Architects, like ICOMOS, like ICOM, for example, these three institutions were represented in this council. The council was extinguished, and all the decisions now are in the hands of the coordinator of this area in the Ministry of Citizenship. I think I'm not sure which ministry is that, but he's a sergeant from the firefighters. I think he has no previous experience in culture in the cultural area, and he's now in charge of deciding alone something that was decided by the society, that was decided by many specialists of many areas together, analyzing every single aspect. For example, the architects analyzed if the costs of the restoration were correct. The museologist was analyzing the museology aspect. So now everything is in the hands of one person or his team who has no experience in that. Another important thing, and I will finish here, is the destruction of public environmental policies regarding, as you know, a couple of days ago, the Minister of Environmental Policies, Salles, resigned. He has been able to destroy all the policies regarding environmental issues that were built in the last 20 or 30 years. In just 1 year or so, he was able to destroy that. And this, of course, affects also not only the environmental heritage, but also intangible heritage, also tangible heritage, but especially traditional communities that live along inside Amazonia. The National Congress has approved a law, a very criticized law, extinguishing the concept of Amazon, which puts in danger all of these communities that lives in the Amazon, for example. But regarding the actions of the Ministry of Environmental Policies, the destruction also affects quilombolas, that are these communities of former slaves in the rural areas, and many other cultural, traditional communities. So we are really facing a huge threat regarding our cultural heritage. We have written a manifesto in May of 2020, signed not only by the forum, but also by all the representatives of the civil society in the Consultative Council of the IFAN, of the National Heritage Institute, and by 10, almost all of the former presidents of IFAN. I'm talking about former presidents from all the presidents of Brazil in the last 30 years, from José Sarney, who was the first president after the dictatorship, from Michel Temer, Dilma Rousseff, Lula, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Itamar Franco, Collor, every president from every president of IFAN, from every president of Brazil government, signed this manifesto because all of them understood that we were being really threatened by these policies. These policies. This manifesto was sent by ICOMOS Brazil to international ICOMOS, and the then president of ICOMOS, Toshiyuki Kono, answered, registering his support to the forum in the protection of the integrity of IFAN. We understand that the National Heritage Institute is also a cultural good, a cultural asset that we need to protect, that we need to 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 maintain. And Toshiyuki Kono, in the name of ICOMOS, sent letters to the president of the National Congress, to the Minister of Tourism, and to the director of UNESCO in Brazil, registering his extreme worries regarding the current administration of IFAN. So those are our main concerns. We really need the international support to our to our forum. And I thank very much again Vera and Monica for having me here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nivaldo, and thank you again, Leah, for your very impressive testimonies and for your active role in the resistance against the current threats to the heritage conservation in Brazil. I will pass to
Monica,
Vera.
okay, thank you. Just to thank again Nivaldo and Leah. And before we go to our reports, I think I have to say a special and very necessary word. Our deepest recognition to the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and University of São Paulo, to public Brazilian universities that always support our initiatives and help us overcome all the difficulties that this difficult pandemic period and also political moment brought to all of us. Without the public university, without public universities, public institutions, public technicians, everyone that's working for the good of, of the Brazilian population, I think you have to thank them all. They are always supporting us in all this journey. So I'd like to just give that special thanks to the university and also to the University of São Paulo that helped us to organize, also to have, and always to IFAM, to Nivaldo, and to Leah that are representing here our universities and also our all people that are involved, all the professionals, students, researchers, and all technicians that are involved with the heritage conservation and preservation in Brazil. Thank you so much, Nivaldo and Leah, for your very, very special talks and also for your courage, resistance. It's very, very difficult political moment. Thank you so much. And I think, Monica, now for the second part, I'd like to go back to you, Monica, for our highlights, outcomes, with our brief reports of the sessions. And I hope that our trends and recommendations can really provide a good content for our World Heritage Initiative. Monica, now
Thank you, Vera. I just want to quickly pass to our coordinators and mediators of the sessions. I will start to inviting Danielle Pini, our co-coordinator of the initiative here in the New Heritage Approach Globiner, to initiate our reports. Please, Danielle.
Thank you, Monica. So I will report on 4 sessions, if you agree, on the session I coordinated and also on the session that was coordinated by Professor Zan of the University of Bologna. Even if they are session 1, 9, 10, 11, I think you don't mind about the number. So session 1 was dealing with the issue of reinterpreting the outstanding universal value. This was an issue that was put in evidence in our initial debates. And when the question was to find the right balance between the local and universal values, and keeping in mind that the OUV is the key step for the inscription in the World Heritage List and represent the key reference for the future effective protection and management of the properties. So the challenge is evident, how to combine the 2 levels of values, the local ones and the universal ones. Local communities, state parties, specialists may have different perception of the site values, since they are not always understood in the same way by the different actors at the local or at the universal level. The debate was animated by Christine Cameron and Jad Tabet. it's very difficult to summarize in few words these two very rich interventions. I just like to put in evidence a few points that deserve to be developed. And in particular, Christine Cameron put in evidence the presence of different approaches and position in the debate about the outstanding universal value that finally resulted in a compromise and somehow ambiguous definition. Um, she gave some recommendation to update and improve the World Heritage Convention guidelines regarding the need of an holistic approach and the need of new model to bring together the different actors, rethinking the designation process and the integration of different scales, landscape, urban fabric, and so on. On the other hand, Jacques Tabet developed the topic of linking heritage values to cultural diversity. She puts in evidence the rapid growth of the number of properties on the World Heritage List, which is mainly due to the increase of cultural sites. And he highlighted the different motivation to select the site. And this was quite interesting because he mentioned the celebrative and iconic nomination, the brand nomination, the development motivated nominations, the heritage SOS, called like that, nominations. He suggested that an evaluation is urgently needed, otherwise there is the risk of compromising the credibility of the convention that is also threatened by a very unbalanced geographic distribution of the properties. He stressed the fact that OUV have different meanings for the different cultures, so that this should be evaluated by the local communities as well, and not only by the experts. Since the main goal of the convention is the protection and conservation of the earth treasures and international cooperation, he highlights that the crucial point is to illustrate the collective memory of the humanity. Session 9, I jumped to session 9 that was coordinated by Professor Luca Zan, was dealing with the issues of organizing heritage entities for sustainable development. Luca Zan, in his introduction, highlighted the fact that the organizational and managerial understanding is not always, the organization and managerial issues are not always understood as a condition for the sustainability itself. And is also underlined the fact that the lack of historical lack of attention to these aspects makes them good candidate for the definition of new approaches, in the sense that if a new approach should necessarily take into consideration these two aspects, the organizational and managerial aspects. Then the different interventions were mostly related to case studies and highlighted different aspects of the organizing or of the organization of the entities for the heritage protection. In particular, Dan Shoup that developed a case study on Istanbul show that the institutional fragmentation seems to undermine possible results of the process, of any process of conservation, resulting in a quite historical exercise about plans without any commitment on specific projects, without budgeting a single intervention. Jane Thompson, an ICOMOS architect, an ICOMOS expert, refers to her experience in Italy and highlighted the need to link professional discourse and practical attitude toward doable solutions that may really implemented. With reference to many experiences encountered in her active professional work, it showed that that a lot of interesting and important policies are not really implemented because fully implemented because this lack of appropriate management structures. Maria Lusiani of the University of Venice referred to the experience in Machu Picchu and discussed the financial business model of that site, explaining reasons and possible solutions due to the opacity of financial numbers in this context. Luca Zani, in the end, made a presentation on the great archaeological sites of China, underlining some of the unachieved results and also some unwanted results that emerged due to the lack of appropriate management structure, and made a call for a deeper focus on the decision-making process, taking management seriously into account in the transformation from intended into implemented policies. I jump now to session 10. Monica, should I continue like this or?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
No, because of the time.
The time.
Is that okay?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So let's jump to session 10, whose topic was heritage protection and revitalization in urban planning system. This session was particularly interesting because there were four important interventions. I introduced the session putting in evidence the need of articulating of integrating conservation in a territorial, urban, and landscape perspective, articulating nature and culture, tangible and intangible dimensions, thus reinterpreting values and attributes through proactive strategies of conservation and revitalization. The point I made was that referring to the HUL, to the historic urban landscape recommendation that is being discussed now in this moment, is the 10th anniversary. But I think we can remind this important recommendation in our webinar today. I put in evidence that urban planning tools should integrate protection measures for the urban fabric beyond the conventional system of listing the monuments, and has to promote at the same time an enhanced functional and economic role of the historic cities in the wider urban and regional context. The HUL recommendation also calls for an integration of heritage conservation in territorial and urban planning and tools with a broad participatory perspective, and this is crucial to ensure an appropriate and inclusive heritage management. The debate was the intervention of Yotio Sangrahara, Deputy Director of the UNESCO World Heritage Center, was really centered, focusing on the historic urban landscape recommendation and on the initiatives that are being launched for the 10th anniversary. She pointed out that this recommendation consists in a kind of soft law that embraces different layers of heritage values, linking the conservation to the sustainable development and shifting the focus from monuments to large urban and territorial context. Mostly, she considered the city as a process and not as a static element. The recommendation, she underlined how the recommendation is linked to the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and to the new urban agenda. And the actual approach refers to the governance structure, it refers to the Sustainable Development Goals priorities. It refers to the criteria and tools for mapping and assessing vulnerability, including climate change. Sorry. Sorry. Yes. Finally, she mentioned a series of initiatives that are being undertaken, like the World Heritage Cities Lab, the World Heritage City Dialogues, the Urban Notebooks, and the World Heritage Cities Program. Finally, she announced the launch of a call for action on the event of the 10th anniversary today, yesterday and today. After Yoti Zangrahar, Bonnie Burnham developed the topic of creating a heritage-led investment process, and she stressed the need of a shift from downstream model to upstream model. She stressed the need of developing a sustainable model with a broad array of strategy and create an ecosystem to facilitate heritage-led regeneration through multidisciplinary groups. Several aspects have to be taken into consideration, such as available resources, urgent needs, viability and impact, as well as the capacity of the local partners. An integrated and adaptable framework of coordination for successful public-private cooperation has to be created, where different governmental spheres and roles are represented, together with external participants, including academic and NGO. Eric Hubrechts, from France, manager of the international affairs of the Institut d'Aménagement et Urbanisme de l'Île-de-France, developed the topic of innovative planning in historical center. His intervention was focusing on the need to develop specific and detailed local regulations tools to protect, regenerate and enhance the historic areas. Guidelines are not sufficient, and as he said, detailed and specific regulations are required in order to ensure the control of on any kind of development, the regulations for land use, the building height, and so on. Action plans for the historic areas should embrace co-producing values. In particular, it's crucial to find a balance between the preservation of the traditional urban fabric and the reach of sustainable development goals. He said that statutory criteria based on authenticity and integrity are not sufficient to cover all the other values that may have to be supported by the institutions and the society. In particular, he made an issue of the question of the scale. He said that the metropolis is the main human artifacts of the 21st century and has to be considered the heritage of tomorrow. New tools have to be created to address this issue, taking into consideration that more than half of the urban production today is informal and will be probably the heritage of tomorrow. So there is the need of tools to preserve the values of the metropolitan areas, creating connections, protecting agriculture, limiting urbanization, preserving green corridor, and so on. Finally, in the same session, Rusudan Mirtsikashvili from Georgia working in the Hairy Land research at Newcastle University, developed the topic of heritage and landscape, what role in the governance. Um, she pointed out how modern academic as well as policy discourses validate both heritage and landscape as core ingredient of the localist place-based politics, policies, and governance mechanism. Because these are believed to play a role in defining a place and its community from where the bottom-up movement start, thus contributing to a more democratic decision-making. But based on case studies from England and Georgia, she put in evidence that many questions remain, in particular, for whom heritage counts? Who are the community? These are questions that are not always easy, that do not have always an easy answer. Does local really means more democratic? In any case, the social outcomes of the place-based heritage and landscape-led regeneration and revitalization initiatives have to be carefully considered. Several experiences of heritage and landscape governance in different socioeconomic realms offer a rich material for observation of the small government strategies, national government-led localist policies, and bottom-up movement in action. Finally, session 11. Session 11 is a session that discussed the concept of integrity and authenticity, that, as you know, are conditions that should be met by a World Heritage property to be deemed of outstanding universal value. But in general, these two concepts of integrity and authenticity are considered as a filter to define the heritage status of a site, be that a building, be that a natural site or whatever. As for authenticity, as we know, this is defined by the operational guideline on the basis of the NARA documents, but these criteria are not always easy to apply, for instance, in urban context. Whilst for integrity, the reference to the criteria of wholeness is not always clearly defined. In both cases, it seems that the dynamic character of a living urban heritage is not fully taken into consideration. Moreover, there is an issue that deserves to be seriously addressed. The fact that there are several famous and very popular reinvented historical sites. I just mentioned the Palace of Knossos, for instance, or the city of Carcassonne designed, reconstructed by Viollet-le-Duc, the historic Warsaw, for instance, just to mention a few ones, that call for a revision of these concepts to better frame their use in the definition and implementation of conservation strategies, especially in the case of living cultural heritage sites. Dina Bahoum, an Egyptian engineer and conservation architect, developed the topic of the reflection on the authentic and the modern of architectural and urban palimpsests in the case studies from Egypt. She revised the evolution of this concept through the different versions of the operational guidelines since '77 until the NARA documents of '94 that provided the present definition of authenticity. She stressed the importance of authenticity. She stressed the fact that the importance of authenticity is linked essentially to the scope of conservation. The diversity of interpretation and application of authenticity over time is influenced by a variety of factors, included but not limited to the site typologies, the date of construction, the functions, and the values. Based on some examples, she reflects on what the authentic and the modern means, suggesting that conservation and management plans should present the site's authenticity and integrity through a complex and multi-layered history, attributes, and specificity, taking into consideration not only the material fabric, but also their functional significance. And finally, Rosane Piccolo from Brazil, researcher at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism of the University of Sao Paulo, developed the topic integrity and authenticity, a controversial pair in the World Heritage System. She pointed out how UNESCO consolidated the ideas of common heritage through the World Heritage List, establishing a globally shared understanding of the concept and the instruments. The access to the list was mediated by the association with criteria of exceptionality and by meeting the conditions of integrity and authenticity. Although they appear to be well-defined terms, the controversial processes that are related to the establishment of these filters points to the existence of profound disagreements and misunderstanding, including linguistic barrier that persists to the present day. She highlighted technical and political administrative origins of the conceptual player, contextualizing them with the establishment of procedures for World Heritage recognition based on the documents produced by the main bodies involved with UNESCO's action. She underlines the transformation of integrity as a critical aspect. She underlines the transformation of integrity assessment into the authenticity test, the use of an understanding of ecological integrity in the assessment of cultural assets, and the notion of heritage as a work of art to be fully authenticated. I stop here. I hope to have well understood all the interventions, to have summarized the most relevant issues and topics that have been presented by the different expert scholars that have participated in the sessions. And I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniele. Right now, we are going to pass the floor to Jonathan, please.
Thanks, Monica, and thank you, Daniele. Actually, that highlighted, I think, a lot of the issues that came out throughout the month. So I'm very grateful that I don't have to summarize those issues. I think that was a really great summary of all of those things. But I do want to pull out some of the highlights that came out of the sessions that I was involved in which were a session on cross-conventional approaches to World Heritage, decolonization of heritage, and 2 sessions of student and youth research and the work that students are doing around the world. I think in the cross-conventional approach session, what came out very strongly for me was there's a definite effort from the part of the, in inverted commas, users of the other conventions to work with the World Heritage Convention and to start to include those different heritage elements that are covered by the many UNESCO conventions that deal with heritage in World Heritage sites, if not within the criteria themselves, at least within the way that we approach World Heritage sites and the way that we understand World Heritage sites. And I think that that's important, that these other conventions bring a much deeper and more layered narrative to World Heritage sites. And although all of the panelists that I worked with understand that the convention itself cannot be changed, there's definitely scope for those changes to creep into the operational guidelines, and for those changes to be applied within how those operational guidelines are used in determining the management and nomination and listing of World Heritage sites. In part, I think people are enthusiastic to work with the World Heritage Convention because of its enormous success. I offhand and I've written it down somewhere in my notes, but I can't find it at this point, how many states are party to the World Heritage Convention, but it outstrips any of the others. And I think that that's important. I think it's something that everybody understands on a fundamental level, this idea of what World Heritage is. And that certainly came out in the discussions around this cross-conventional approach. There are, of course, challenges with that. As you look at these other conventions, World Heritage moves more from a selection of sites and into this idea of heritage landscapes. And that has its own set of challenges, especially when it comes to things like intangible heritage, and the decisions that need to be made around whether to choose the sites or the practices as the main theme and as the narrative that really stands out at those sites. And how you do that and how you use those two conventions together is difficult, but not impossible. One of the recommendations that came out of this session was this idea that there's a challenge around a common language, a common dictionary of how heritage is defined and understood within those conventions. Terms like significance or value or authenticity are understood differently depending on whether you're looking at intangible heritage, world heritage, or even things like underwater cultural heritage. All of these things are, the terminology is slightly different. And perhaps there's a need to develop a common dictionary of that terminology and to understand the conventions as they overlap or don't overlap, and try and bring those things together and find those commonalities. In the decolonization of heritage session, I think the three panelists all touched on similar issues with decolonizing heritage. And this is certainly not a new issue or a new debate. Leo pointed out earlier, this is a debate that started back in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and it's something that has remained with us. And the challenges of decolonizing heritage have remained with us. Some of the speakers pointed out the issue that perhaps the disciplines associated with heritage and the way that we research and practice heritage are rooted in Western education systems. The way we do archaeology, the way we train experts, find their foundations in those education systems. And that's understandable. The way those education systems developed was in reaction to the challenges that existed in those regions. The challenges now that we've just applied it across the board. And well, when I talk about some of the highlights from the youth and student webinars, I think you'll see how those challenges are manifest and how people are dealing with those challenges. The discussion around decolonization also looked at how we present those sites and the role of institutions like museums in presenting heritage and world heritage more generally. That museums play a role in not only defining the narrative for states and for world heritage, but also in issues like restitution of objects and sites and the ownership of knowledge and the ownership of objects. And how we do that, I think, is something that we need to look at and can go into the recommendations for the World Heritage Convention. For me, one of the highlights was this idea of sites and museums as processes, in as much as they are tangible and monumental sites, and looking at how we deal with that process, how we look at the dynamism of heritage and the changing narratives and changing perspectives of heritage, and how we bring in those different perspectives, moving away from just the perspective being driven by the experts and the people that sit on the committees of UNESCO, and opening up that ownership to people who live at the sites and around the sites. The management of World Heritage is often driven by the people who, with the best intentions, believe that they know what is best for everyone. And that may not always be the case. When it comes to universality of World Heritage, it may be the people around those those experts who decide what is important and how that should be presented, rather than those voices being suppressed and lost within the World Heritage narratives and the World Heritage Convention. One of the speakers mentioned the idea of using mitigation as a way to suppress those other narratives and possibly exclude people from those narratives. That this idea of heritage legislation generally, and the World Heritage Convention, of course, falls into that, tends to find ways to promote aspects of heritage while destroying others. And mitigation very often does that. That there's a destruction of a site or a landscape, but it's couched in the terms of being okay because a museum stays behind or a narrative stays behind. And that some of the speakers felt drew a line under heritage and stop that dynamic process of continuing and that heritage remaining relevant. That many of the heritage sites perhaps lost their meaning because those narratives didn't change with changing perspectives and changing global views. Moving briefly onto the student and youth global now. I think, and there were 18 presentations over the two sessions, and I found them both uplifting and difficult. That many of the views expressed there are those changing views, and the way that people view the world now in terms of many issues, from gender, sexuality, and race, are quite different to the way the world was viewed in 1970 when this convention was developed. And that I think comes with many challenges as well. What stood out for me was the complexity of these heritage sites and the complexity of these heritage landscapes from the perspectives of young researchers and students and young people, I guess, generally. And it was a wonderful thing to see. We had students from across the globe, Asia, Europe, the Americas, and narratives coming out of Africa as well. And that made it truly global. There were these perspectives from both the global north and the global south. And the different ways that people are dealing with and accessing World Heritage was, I think, interesting. There were shared challenges, but there were also differences in the way that people approached heritage. But what stood out for me was the sites that all of these researchers chose began to put heritage on a more personalized level. That the spaces that they were describing were the social spaces, the porticos of Bologna, for example, the streets of Rio, and the sacred sites in Hawaii. These were all places that had a personal aspect. And I thought that bringing in that idea of social spaces, urban landscapes, sacred sites, natural landscapes, was an interesting way to approach that and to develop that inclusivity and to make the experience of World Heritage something that everybody relates to. And I wondered whether that personalized experience, that experience of social interaction, was a way of infusing new meaning and new significance into World Heritage sites. That these are not just that the universality of World Heritage sites is not necessarily looked at from a monumental global scale. That these recognizable sites, things like the Colosseum, but that there are other social aspects around that, and that those values are truly universal and truly reflect World Heritage, I think. So yeah, without going into too much detail, the sessions were recorded, and I would urge everybody to go and look at those fresh perspectives of World Heritage and heritage more generally. But that these voices and these perspectives truly resonate globally by looking at the societies and the social aspects of World Heritage. I think it does reflect a much broader set of values and a much broader significance that is important across the globe. I think I will leave it there and hand back to Monica. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think that you are doing a great job, you, Danielle, and you too, because many issues that appear in the sessions have common ground in terms of the challenges that we face and the trends and something that we have to deal with. So right now I will pass the floor to Ruba Saleh. She will provide a report in other sessions that she was the coordinator together with Christian Oss. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. And I would like to congratulate you and the Brazilian team for this fantastic coordination in the last few months. It was a privilege to be part of New Heritage Approaches. So as you anticipated, I would like to share my screen and present what was done in the two heritage economic sessions on behalf of Christian Ost and me. So I would like to move to the highlights from the main speakers, starting with David Throsby, who opened the session by shedding light on the main milestones in the development of the economics of heritage since the 80s. He explained how the theory and concepts evolved from cultural good to cultural capital and how this links with sustainability and ecological economics. He emphasized on value and valuation and explained the duality of value, the economic and cultural one, where a lot of different valuation methods exist today for marketable and non-marketable values, while to assess the cultural values, conceptual bases are well established, but measurement remains very problematic and there's still a long way to go. Finally, David provided some thought-provoking insights about the future and the role of policy at the micro and macro levels. Our second speaker was Christian Ost, who investigated the value chain of all activities directly and indirectly related to the conservation of cultural heritage and described the complex systems of private and public goods, commodity and service markets, real estate and cultural tourism sectors, plus a variety of economic actors. Christian stressed the importance of innovation, the role of policy and the value chain, and the need for upskilling towards cultural entrepreneurship with positive societal impacts. Pierluigi Sacco presented a conceptual canvas that allows to explore a series of different functionings of heritage and how to assess their critical conditions for the various cultural production regimes. He elaborated on how the notions of heritage evolved and what are the main challenges and how to generate real social sustained responsibility for heritage through participatory governance. And for this specific point, he actually elaborated on the importance of mapping, filtering, indexing, metabolizing, and entitling. Finally, Andy Pratt emphasized on the fact that the cultural ecosystem is dynamic, heterogeneous, and changing. He investigated the cultural and creative ecosystem and the circular economy and explored commonalities and differences, as well as what can be learned from this cyclical thinking. Andy highlighted the need for new agendas to face the challenge of effective governance and the urgency of upskilling in terms of governance and its related communication and legitimization also for policymakers. If we think about the converging ideas coming out of this first session, we could say that everyone agreed that culture is a living system, agreed on the need to pay attention to the hidden system in view of policy and recommendation, the need to understand the broader interrelated system of the way culture is produced and adapt to today's limit of the planet, The existing governance infrastructure is rooted in the past and inhibits the opportunity of achieving a good governance. There's a need to reform. Everyone agreed on the importance of legitimizing the local community in order to preserve the physical heritage, the need to adopting, otherwise there will be continuous resistance and continuation of old formulas in a post-COVID scenario. And finally, everyone agreed on empowering. There's a need for reskilling, upskilling, and capability building. Our second session, while our first session was more about concepts and theoretical frameworks, our second session was more on evidence-based innovative practices related to heritage economics. And our first speaker, Donovan Ripkema, gave many examples to show evidence of the sustainability and resilience of heritage conservation. He provided evidence in job creation, conservation as a labor-intensive activity, local outcomes, skilled jobs, fiscal outcomes, etc. And he elaborated on the fact that in times of crisis and transition, historic districts are more resilient in terms of property prices and other economic values. Our second speaker, Alessio Re, pled for the central role of economics on conservation. At the governance level, actually, he speculated on the importance of decentralizing conservation and bringing it at the regional level where economic policies are more effective. He also provided examples from Europe and Africa, indicating the need to innovate with new approaches that rely on historic urban landscape and community approaches. And he emphasized on the importance of linking between tangible and intangible towards a broader definition of cultural heritage. Christer Gustafsson reflected on the place of conservation in creative schemes of development, and he reminded us of the Halland model of upstream conservation, where cultural goals can be instrumental and can address overarching sustainable development goals. He argued that conservation is no more an exclusive experts thing, but a trading space where many stakeholders negotiate for their own stakes. And he concluded by saying that heritage is central in the way that it suits very diverse social, environmental, and economic goals simultaneously. Finally, Luigi Fusco-Girard reminded us of the broad cultural context and the human-centered approach, which is crucial for the long-term development of urban and rural areas. He also introduced the concept of circular economy as a sustainable approach, which makes placemaking more inclusive, resilient, with local-oriented resources and outcomes. Finally, he reflected on the importance of a change of mind and of innovation/creativity as drivers of sustainable development. Our takeaway from this specific session were two main converging ideas. The first one was the need for a change in paradigm, where economics is no more taken as an expected bonus, quick win, or benefit from conservation, but as part of the sustainability pillars achieved through instrumental valued conservation. Culture is more integrated in social economic processes. If you look at historic urban landscape, community approach, intangible creativity, and all speakers underlined the question of job creation in a phase of economic transition. Finally, the Schumpeter approach of creative destruction with new and old activities was mentioned, also in the framework of post-COVID development with substantial and lasting social behavioral changes. The second converging idea was the need for a change in the system itself. So it was argued that capitalism is sometimes blamed, but it's not just about profit and money making, but new perspectives where antagonism between public and private is no more at stake. There are in-between situations like the economy of the commons, public-private people's innovations, keeping the market could have a useful contribution to cultural activities. And finally, the example of cultural and creative industries where entrepreneurship is helpful to foster new innovations, adaptive reuse, and participatory governance. Thank you very much. This is all for me.
Thank you very much, Ruba. And I will pass the floor to Shahid.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica, and thank you, as everybody else has said, to your Brazilian team that have done such a marvelous job bringing this discussion into a global environment. I was the coordinator for, let me just check, session 18, which was on heritage of the marginalized. And the central proposition here was that much of the discourse in World Heritage tends to be focused on official ideas about what constitutes heritage, and quite often those that are marginalized in society are also marginalized from heritage, and this ranges from women to the unemployed. A whole range of people who are not connected to heritage in any formal way. And that was one of the main themes of the session, the connection between the formal and the informal. We had three presenters, Ugo Munashi, who talked about heritage at risk, looking at the question of gender in a context of disasters. Toki Brown, who spoke about some of the challenges associated with the recognition of the marginalized from an African perspective, and Tsitsena Savante, who talked about the role of indigenous women in Brazil with regard to heritage. If I could start with Ugo's presentation, where he was looking at how sensitive is being gender sensitive when it comes to disaster and as it affects specifically a heritage. His main point here was that when one applies the formal criteria around how disaster relief is implemented, it often overlooks the social structure, particularly the informal aspects of a particular society, or a particular region, or a particular city or village. He made mention of the fact that within one particular region in Indonesia, in Asia, that there's a difference between matrifocality and associated religion with those of other places on the same within the same region, and that the implementation of disaster relief has to take this into account, and it often doesn't. And so the question arises about how the more formal approaches can be amended in order to take into account what happens on the ground. He specifically mentioned here women that participate in the economy, and they would not be able to participate in discussions around disaster relief and heritage. Toki Brown made the point around the way in which people recognize one another. She called this reciprocity, that it's only you can only recognize oneself in somebody else if there is a process by which this recognition takes place. Again, it was how the formal approaches of heritage tend to miss these aspects. She specifically talked about aspects that related to households and families within communities, and they in turn relate to governmental structures, whether at the national level or at a global level. And so she particularly wanted to link these informal or unrecognized aspects to how one bridges the gap between tangible and intangible aspects of heritage. Tzitzana talked about the role of indigenous women. She placed emphasis on the democratization of Brazil from the 70s and 80s onwards, and the importance role that indigenous women, particularly in the Amazon, played. At first, it took place at a very slow level, but by the 1990s and the 2000s, indigenous women were playing a much more important role, to the extent that they were now sitting on decision-making bodies. The important point that she was making was not that only that democratization allowed for this to happen, but it also allowed for indigenous people to be recognized. But more than that, women were allowed the choice of where they were wanted to play a role. Not everyone necessarily wanted to play a role in these public spheres related to heritage. Others wanted to play other kinds of roles. And this was the importance of her point. How and in what ways were platforms created for women to be able to play these roles? I think if one had to summarize one of the most important discussion points that came out of the three papers, was that there was a recognition, as everybody else has already stated, that the 1972 World Heritage Convention and the 2003 Intangible Convention need radical transformation and brought into some form of relationship with one another in order for us to be able to bridge this gap between tangible and intangible, particularly since in most cases, or in the view of people in that session, the tangible is always given priority over the intangible. I think that's all that I have to say for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shahid. And now I pass the floor to Vera. Vera and I we are going to be very brief with our reports, so that we can pass the floor to Mike, to Francesco, and Mike. Sorry, it's always difficult to say her name correctly. But anyway, so that we can hear from them also concerning the highlights of this initiative. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. I'll just share my screen very briefly. My English is not so good, so I prefer to share a little bit. I'll go straight to the name of the session, session 7, participatory processes and heritage education as tool for access to citizenship and democratization of heritage. And you had two speakers, Gert Burgess from Netherlands, and he's talked about the Herland experiences. And also had Hendrik Tibben from Hong Kong, and he also brought us new ideas of how deal with urban and industrial heritage in Hong Kong. So it was very interesting. I have all the reports, contexts, the presentations. I will not go through the description. I think I want to go straight ahead to the trends and recommendations, since we need to have that in a way that next year we can just have all this collection of recommendations from our sessions. So the trends, both speakers emphasized the importance of basing participatory processes in heritage education on social constructivism approach, rather than the essentialist conception. It was a theoretical discussion. And also the innovations towards participatory processes and community heritage education tend to focus on new methods of listening, debating, perceiving, and intervening. We focus on the everyday heritage in the set of values, habits, traditions, and knowledge brought by the community represented by diverse social groups under a co-creation strategy. And as recommendations, we can point out to understand community heritage education in public participation in various modes as a process, not as a product. To promote in participatory processes, we focus on community heritage education, multivocality, instead of pursuing consensus. So the diversity was the main topic of that session, and you have this set of trends and recommendations. We'll go to the other session, session 17.
Session 19.
19, sorry. Very briefly, but to have this message. Session 19 was about heritage in large metropolises, emergent approaches. We had a very deep, a very rich session on June 18 with many good speakers. Pedro Ortiz from International Metropolitan Institute, sharing the metropolis, and then Francesco Bandarin from Italy. Global report and survey that is being made by the Heritopolis movement initiative. And then you have 4 case studies. Jae Choi from Korea, bringing Seoul, and then Antonella Contin from Italy, bringing the case study in Milan. Then Ksenia Mezzanina, bringing the case study in Moscow, and Jessie Karubitsebina from South Africa, the case study in Johannesburg. Then you have Michael Turner and Eric Hubrecht from Michael Turner from Israel, and also Eric Hubrecht from France, linking research and practice, making the dialogue between universities and planning authorities. And then as a final word from Rafael Forero from Colombia, talking about the UN Habitat as a supporter of the metropolitan hubs. We have 3 parts in the session: setting the scene. Then you have Pedro setting the scene for us, discussing tangible and intangible, very, very deep theoretical background, a methodological background. I just can tell you, go and watch the recorded session, all the recorded sessions, because it's very, very rich as a message. But I just put out the very important messages that Pedro brought us. In the survey questions, remember that the Heritopolis is, Mike can explain better after that, but putting on a survey with 3 questions. What's the understanding of heritage in your metropolitan case? How was the heritage preservation evolution? And also, what are the international trends observed in your case? And then the 4 cases represented, very interesting, bringing different perspectives. The Korea case, a cultural framework with aspects very related to Korea, and then Milan, bringing Antonella brought us a cultural manifesto, and then trying to expose that framework relating city, water source, industry, facilities, and a park. It was very important manifesto. And Ksenia brought the Moscow case talking about the evolution of since the beginning of the 20th century until now, showed how the political atmospheres and also the governance, how heritage was concerned about that evolution in Russia and Russian Federation. And then Jessie, she brought us a very important exposition about what they could in Africa and I would say all the South world, making the heritage by them, for them, and with them, by communities, for the communities, and with the communities. It was very important. And then she brought an example of a studio work with students that put a sensibilization about the heritage visualization with the communities. And then after that, we had Michael and Francesco discuss about that comments. Michael and Eric, they discussed also with the questions that were brought up by the audience and then question and answer debate. And then Rafael made the final new trends defended by UN Habitat. As trends, I could say, as trends and as recommendations. As trends, the session brought us one of the questions posed by the presenters was the difference between metropolitan icon and metropolitan hub. It's a very important conception, and between international icon or a metropolitan heritage. So that is a big question that they brought us. The processes involved metropolitan heritage, inclusiveness, interculturality, transculturality, three major processes as a trend. The confrontation between anthropological approaches and academic strategies, the digitalization of heritage protection sphere, the increasing role of civil society and communities in the implementation of heritage policies and heritage protection, increased attention to new heritage types, including the 20th century heritage. I would say the 21st century also. Recommendations to understand the definition of values as applied for metropolitan heritage, to find similarities among the metropolis under analysis, to promote integration between academic approaches and governance strategies, to be aware of change patterns and apply flexibility in the understanding of specific values, characteristics, and local cultural assets. So very shortly, a very dense session and a very important one. I will stop here. And as the final report, Brazilian projects. We have this special session. It was a shame that we had a very small audience, but we prepared with so much care, so much thought, these projects for you. And I hope that you can just go for the recorded and see the videos, etc. But you had two projects dealing with artisans and artists, Now Cultural and Memórias do Futuro, Memories of the Future. And then you have the other two projects, Mapping Everyday Heritage with Children and Youth. It's a research project. And Maré Cheia de Cinema, it's a video production with local traditional people from Paraty in Rio de Janeiro. Then you have the context, the descriptions about the context of the context of the project, and also the messages. These two very important projects brought to us, and also I hope all over the world can see these four interesting exhibitions with many teams involved. The first team, Now Cultural, with Isabela Carpena and also Felipe Pitan. Members of the Future, Gabriel, Luiz Eduardo, Melanie, Mônica, Pedro, Rubens, Vitória, and Giovanna. It's a big team producing all the videos. It's videos with artists that relates to a heritage and landscape. And then the second part, mapping everyday heritage of children and youth, and Maré Cheia de Cinema, High Tide of Cinema. The first project, the Everyday, with Alex Salamonier, Flora Cardoso, Brendo Santos, Isabela Maiolino. They selected drawings from the students in Rio municipal elementary schools and how they could understand heritage from their point of view. It's very rich, very brave, and very important piece of work. And then the other one, with Domitila Almentero, Pablo de las Cuevas, and Ronaldo Almentero, showed us the work in Paraty with the Caiçara culture. It's a local community of fishermen. And as trends and recommendations. Contributions to inclusive heritage education strategies based on the diffusion and recognition of everyday heritage and artisans and artistic manifestations. Children's perceptions have been disregarded in the current evaluation criteria and in discussions about the character of its heritage, the traditional cultures, the artisans' knowledge, and the artists' expertise as a human resource to face the conflicts and build resistance through the lived experiences. Preparation and organization of workshops, videos, local activities prepared with and by local residents, artisans, and artists. Co-creation of cultural activities and products as an innovative process in the heritage education, preservation, and dissemination. And as a set of recommendations, we have to include everyday heritage and the local knowledge, artisans and artists' perception, culture, and affective relations when discussing heritage protection and heritage education, to develop inclusive innovative tools to incorporate listening strategies and evaluation criteria and analytical framework, to incorporate local cultural manifestations and everyday life traditions as a human resource, to plan and develop cultural activities in a co-creation mode, and finally, to innovate in heritage preservation and consciousness through local culture, artistic movements, and artisans' abilities in processes of understanding and knowledge building. That's it, briefly. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you very much, Vera. I will be as brief as I can, and then I will pass to Mike, Francesco, and Mike to their last messages. I will also, just a moment, share my screen. Very quickly. Just a moment. Okay. Well, I will make a brief report about session 5 and session 14. Session 5 deal with managing landscape change, natural, cultural, and intangible dimensions. The goal of this session was to debate integrative approaches for managing landscape change and conservation. This session addressed aspects such as the articulation between landscape planning and landscape conservation, and emergent and emerging strategies in multiple scales of applications. We counted with great contributions from Julia Reis Paris, Paulo Mota, Ricardo Riveiros, and Tashka Yawanawa. I will not have time to go through the context, but I will do as Vera, just to highlight the trends and open issues, and also the recommendations that come from this discussion. Well, in terms of trends, one of them is that the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated the inadequacy of the current urban settlement models based on homogeneous zoning, social segregation, and urban-rural separation to deal with emerging impacts. This striking conjuncture raised concerns and demands to adapt cities and metropolises to the current stress and its consequences derived from COVID pandemics and ongoing climate change impacts. New directions will benefit from acknowledging the conflicting relationship between societies and their environments, and from bridging the dichotomy between the utilitarian and economic values and the intangible spiritual and ecological values. As for recommendations, I would like to highlight to blend scientific expressions with evaluation by shift from the focus on tangible values to the linkage with cultural, spiritual, traditional, and other intangible values, to revisit, to blend, to adapt, and further develop existing landscape-based and right-based
Monica, your audio is not good. Can you, your sound is not good. Can you just take your camera out? Maybe the connection will be better.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you, Vera. I'll do that. Where I was. Well, to shift from models on, no, I'm sorry. To shift from applying top-down legal and regulatory frameworks to horizontal and right-based approaches, to rebalance urban-rural relationships in order to reduce the existing territorial inequalities, to improve decision-making process in landscape protection, development, and management, considering the values of identity and local communities' perceptions, to integrate scientific and traditional knowledge in valuation process through engagement with local communities and indigenous people, and to ensure that urban policies embrace an integrative, participatory, and multi-sector conservation approach, acknowledge nature-culture linkages, and local communities' perceptions. I'll stop now and share the other. And session 14 was about cultural landscape on the World Heritage List, a critical reflection. And the goal of this session was to deepen the debate on the cultural landscape concept, bringing forward different points of view, including the discussion on the pertinence of this concept, the achievements, the management challenges, and recommendations. We had great and very insightful and thought-provoking contributions from Patricia O'Donnell, Maya Ishizawa, Monica Luengo, and Vanessa Bello. And in terms of trends and open issues, I would like to highlight that there is a consensus toward the notion of landscape as an entangled web of nature and culture formed by the interaction between people and the territory in several layers, continuously modifying the existing context as a rich and sometimes indecipherable palimpsest. Then understanding the landscape matrix is the first step to understand the landscape values and attributes. Challenges concerning landscape management are many, especially regarding the overlaps and mixed with mixed sites. With the concept of a pristine natural landscape is nowadays acknowledged as largely mythical. Meanwhile, the cultural significance of landscapes are widely accepted. In addition, the opposing view between nature and culture has not added much to the conceptual debate, or especially did not help to increase landscape protection and improve its management. Taking these considerations into account, should we continue to frame and label landscapes as cultural landscapes? These were one of the open issues that was highlighted in these in this session. And in terms of the definition of mixed sites and cultural landscapes, it still needs further development, despite the fact that reframing the concept of cultural landscape in the World Heritage System will be a huge challenge. A broad redefinition of this concept is needed to embrace its multiple meanings and nuances, acknowledging its overlap with mixed site category. If it is not possible to change the World Heritage criteria, efforts should be made to change the way we use the criteria, allowing for more flexibility in its application. Recommendations are to continue the discussion regarding the concept's terminology, incorporating and balancing different visions, to focus on planetary heritage rights and on the interface between cultural diversity and biological diversity, to embrace an integrative, participatory, and multi-sector landscape approach, acknowledging nature-cultural linkages and community values as a dynamic and interacting system, to seek for a global strategy to balance the World Heritage List, to promote joint coordination efforts gathering the 3 UNESCO advisory bodies for improving nomination, inscription, evaluation, monitoring, and management processes, to revisit, adapt, blend, and develop the existing landscape conservation approaches in order to enhance the integration between tangible and intangible heritage, acknowledging traditional knowledge systems, to apply landscape-based and right-based approaches in the selection, nomination, planning, and management of World Heritage sites, and in climate actions, in ecosystem restoration, and in heritage conservation, to allow the identification and interpretation of values not only in accordance of the outstanding universal value, but also in accordance with the community values. And finally, to promote further discussions to face the current instability regarding the overlap in the definitions of mixed sites and cultural landscapes, including the mixing scientific expert valuation with the evaluation of the local communities and indigenous people. Thank you very much. And I will pass the floor to Mike and Francesco for their final words.
You can open your camera, Monica, now.
Yep. Well, thank you all. We've had an amazing month of being challenged by new heritage approaches. The 2 past decades have seen great changes, and new approaches need bold attitudes. I'd mentioned in the opening session that Stafford Beer has said it is fruitless to imagine that extra effort and extra capital can resurrect moribund organisms. A decision must be made to superimpose a new growth curve upon the old. In the case of technology, this means embarking on fresh research. We've undergone a metamorphosis in these 2 decades, and there's no turning back. We've changed from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And yet, to take in the scale of the change, with the United Nations updating the population projections for 2100 to 11.3 billion persons in the world, doubling the 2000 number of 6 billion and doubling that of the 1960 times. Business as usual is not an option. And I think that we are really arranging the deck chairs on the top flight of the Titanic. It's been said that over the next decade, Cities will continue to grow larger and more rapidly. At the same time, new technologies will unlock massive streams of data about cities and their residents. As these forces collide, they will turn every city and metropolis into a unique civic laboratory, the place where technology is adapted in novel ways to meet local needs. During this month, we've been exposed to over 20 sessions, distilled and summarized by Danielle, Jonathan, Ruba, Shahid, Vera, and Monica so well. And we're looking forward to seeing these as part and parcel of our global report, which will be so important for 2022. We've also reviewed institutional and organization processes, which will dramatically transform how we manage territorial change. We've addressed the living heritage, linking tangible and intangible, and evaluating this in economic terms to ensure sustainable development. Moreover, we've considered linking culture.
Mike, we are not hearing you.
Yes, I think you unmute. You have to unmute yourself, Mike.
Culture and nature with new frontiers. I'm sorry, you haven't heard me?
No, only in the last minute, so you can just continue.
Mike, I think you have to unmute yourself.
You can hear? The internet is rather weak here.
Okay, now go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so I hope it works now. We've addressed the living heritage, linking tangible and intangible, evaluating this in economic terms to ensure sustainable development. Moreover, considering linking culture and nature with new frontiers for urban resilience and heritage sustainability, supporting the marginalized and those voices not normally heard. We were exposed to the Amazonas and the role of civil society in ensuring the environmental sustainability in Brazil. And lastly, we're also addressing the large metropolises, which will be the new urban form. Leah also highlighted the need to stand by our humanistic values, social groups excluded, to be inclusive for the favelas. It's in fact continuation of between and beyond and outside the silo. These indeed are the challenges we are facing, and these sessions have given us directions with new heritage approaches. And the coming months, we're going to actually try and address what you've actually said. Our thanks to the team, Monica, Vera, Danielle, Jonathan, and all the other people, and the hundreds of supporters that ensure that we will all not left behind. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I pass to Francesco.
Thank you very much. I think I need to be very, very short because I think we are beyond the time that was foreseen. Listen, very simple. I think this month has been a very, very exciting exploration. You've done much more than we expected from the beginning, you know, because when we plan the months, you know, we expect a few discussions, some exchanges between experts and so on. But here you've done a full around the world exploration, and I would like to thank you for that, because many of the issues that you have raised and discussed and exposed will come back. Will come back in the coming months as we will continue our discussion, but most of it they will come back next year, when we will have to bring back to you know, within the new, say, let's call it reform platform, we want to prepare many of these issues. I think just to summarize, and I'm going to be very, very, very short, and I will also leave with you a proposal. So wait until just a moment, because this proposal I think will be very interesting. To summarize, you have done an analysis of processes, because you know, when you talk about institutional reform, or even just the ways in which you can organize participation, these are change of current processes. I found very interesting the one seminar on urban planning, and because very often heritage is separated from ordinary planning system, and I think we always thought that this was a catastrophic situation, because somehow creates a bubble in which you are with your little thing, and then the rest goes in another direction. So I think we need to do much more on that. I think Danielle and the others and Mike will certainly agree with that. And also the economic, this is another part of very important and substantial process reform that we have to do with heritage. Then you have looked into types and categories. Now, this is another huge area of innovation. Of course, the World Heritage Convention, to be fair, has always been quite innovative. In some cases, even has trailed the innovation. Think, for instance, about the cultural landscapes or other types of heritage. But it remains within a certain track. I think what you have done is we'll be looking at other tracks, way in which we can get out of this, kind of partition between tangible and intangible, which is still there, and it's really, something that limits, a lot innovation in heritage field, and also the partition between culture and nature, which is another thing that we have to try to break, if we want to, look into new types of heritage that can encompass in a better way participation and people's interests and so on. You dealt a little bit with principles, but it was very interesting. I followed the one on integrity, authenticity, but probably that kind of month was not designed for those things, because they're very complicated. But I think it was quite interesting. But certainly was not the most important focal point of your interest. And finally, and I would like to stress that a lot of work on interpretation and the role of heritage in society, the issue of the narratives, the issue of the interpretation, the issue of decolonization, which is a maxi elephant in the room in the World Heritage Convention, something that we will at some point we will have to deal, specifically, because much of the heritage that is there is still under this sign of colonial heritage, and the heritage of the marginals, and that's where I come with the proposal. I think you have shown they have, a big strength of people, of group, and so on. Just a month ago, I went to the inauguration of the Venice Biennale of Architecture, which just opened about a month ago. And I toured all the pavilions and so on. I think many of you have done it also. It's always interesting too. It's like going to a fair where you have, all sorts of things. The interesting, the boring, the crazy. No, it's like a fair. In one corner, I spotted a very interesting pavilion, which is a very small pavilion. It was a pavilion of a group representing the Palestinians, and they had proposed something that I found extremely interesting. They had actually done a World Heritage nomination for a refugee camp in Palestine. Okay, so I rushed to the bookshop and I bought this book, which is really beautiful. And I studied. I mean, people that did it are really competent in World Heritage matters. They've done a perfect World Heritage nomination file for a refugee camp. Now, because you spoke a lot about favelas, I think that you should take the initiative and produce a World Heritage nomination for a favela. And this will be a great demonstration of all the things that you talked about. And also, in putting on the table these documents will be a shocking thing. So take the initiative and produce a nomination file, World Heritage nomination file for a favela of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you very much, Vera. And Monica.
Thank you very much, Francisco. We are going
challenge.
It's a huge challenge. We are going to think about and see, because it's something that really I think worth the effort. I would like briefly to pass to Mike so that she can also briefly say a few words.
Thank you very much. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Maaike Goedkoop. I'm member of of our World Heritage, working a lot behind the screens. And today we're closing 6 months of 2021 debate, which is a milestone. I would like to congratulate the coordination team of New Heritage Approaches, the moderators and speakers for bringing the initiative forward so skillfully and bringing a wonderful closing to these 6 months of 2021 debate. Specific thanks to the University of Rio de Janeiro and Vera and Monica, who have been really wonderful to work with. Thank you very much. As a person who spent much time behind the screens of our World Heritage, I take the opportunity to look back on the last half year, and share some highlights with you. I hope they illustrate how our World Heritage is the ultimate group effort. We're thrilled with so much participation and engagement from everyone, including the audience, and we hope to bring a positive change to civil society engagement in conservation, preservation, and management of heritage. First of all, I would like to share with you some numbers. Until now, 2021 debate consisted of 101 events, with a little over 600 individual speakers, some of which have took the stage more often than once. So we hope to translate all the content into policy recommendations in light of the 50th anniversary of World Heritage Convention. And apart from many events, the teams also have organized calls for participation, contests, surveys, and everything. You can find those on our website. I would like to note that we work towards posting all the sessions on our website, ourworldheritage.org. And I can say that today, all the sessions of information technology, the months of January, diversities and gender, the months of March, disasters and pandemics, the month of May, and the New Heritage Approaches event are all online on our website. So I invite you to look back. And I wanted to say more, but let's leave that to another time. I really would like to thank everyone to participate. And congratulations, Monica and Vera.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mike. It was wonderful to work with you as well. It was a great pleasure to work with you, with the outreach team, to Ana Paula and Amy and Maria Siqueira Maria Eugenia Siqueira. And I would like to finish by acknowledging and give our final thanks to Bruno Coutinho, to Christian Ost, to Julia Ray Paris, Leonardo Castriota, Lucas Zan, Ruba Saleh, Pamela Duran, and Shahid Valda, that composes the team of sessions coordinators and mediators, together with Daniele Pini, Jonathan Schaffman, Flavia Brito do Nascimento, Vera Tangri, and myself. And also to acknowledge and thank you very much the 75 guest speakers for their insightful and thought-provoking contributions. Also, I would like to thank very much José Landi and Mike for the broadcasting the sessions for the Globinar, and also Humberto Bonomo for his kind help sharing his experience in the previous month and for helping in the transmission of some of the sessions. I would like to also thank Adriana Kaufmann for the translations. And I would like also to thank Conservation International team in Brazil and abroad for the partnership. And just a moment. I would like to also thank the group of presenters in the student sessions and also in the project sessions that Vera already shown. And to wish you a very, to wish that we continue this dialogue, this transnational dialogue within until December and also in 2020. So I'll pass the floor to Vera.
Okay, thank you, Monica, Mike, and all of you that are here, also Nivaldo and Leah that just joined us this session. And also, we hope that we can I would just propose to have the reports of the sessions can also be put on the site so that everyone can read the reports. I think it's important to have the recommendations and have the trends. I believe that we can do that. I don't know. It depends on Mike. If she allows us to do that, we can do that and put on the reports over there too. And also, I just would like to thank in the name of in behalf of Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and also University of São Paulo, our partner, all of you that were here with us today, and I hope you can come and stay with us until December, isn't it, Mike? With other months and all the other Globiners that will come. And please access the site, our heritage.org, to follow all the program, the future months, and also all the information, and also recorded sessions that are over there. Thank you so much. I just can wish you a nice weekend.
Yes, but just I would like to also thank the rapporteurs team, Cláudia Muniz, Elias Rus Barcelos, Felipe Sacramento, Júlia Anversa, Larissa Lima, and Maria Carolina Soares, and Ruba Saleh for the rapporteur, for the report, the help on the reports, and also would like to thank the partnership of Daniele Pini, Vera Tangari, Mike Turner, Francesco Bandarin, George Abungo, Jonathan Schaffman, Christina Cameron, Maria Barbari Gravas, Humberto Bonomi, and Ege Wildgreen, together with our other colleagues that I already mentioned, Ana Paula, Paula, and Amy Wilson, and others, to the partnership, for the trust, and for the incentive. So thank you very much.
There are some questions about certificates. I believe that people that have registered in the site, I think it's possible to provide certificates, isn't it, Mike? As I believe.
We need to organize this.
Yes, we can. Yes, we have to have some time to organize, and people that need certificates, they can just ask us by email, and then we can provide the certificate. I believe that's it. Thank you so much. Time for lunch, time for dinners, time for rest, and also have a nice weekend and a nice rest. Thank you so much for being with us, also our audience here and also on YouTube. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tchau, tchau.
Thank you.
Até logo.
Thank you, Nivaldo.